Here I'd like to share some more data from this journal corpus, which is called the One Health English Corpus, 651 journal articles. And this is the phrase I was looking for earlier. If a word is a gene, a cluster is a sequence. That's what I'm trying to show you with my word here, cluster, a word cluster. Addition is an interesting word on its own, but it's just a gene. It's just a single thing. It doesn't do anything interesting by itself. It needs helpers. So I've organized this list into, first of all, those that are used in the introduction and discussion. These words are highly correlated to these sections of a journal article. As a general rule, I would say that spoken language is more likely to sound like the introduction and discussion. So I think the first list is a little bit more interesting than looking at the methods, but actually results section does have some nice phrases for us. What this means here, if percentage of article, is that 39% of the sampled journal articles use the phrase in addition to at least once. That's what S1 means. S1 means subcorpus 1. So the subcorpus here is the introduction that it's most highly correlated to. S2 is the discussion. That's the second most highly correlated subsection of these journals corpus. And here's a sample that I tried to give that's a representative sample. I've also included some notes for each of these that are my own opinion or a little bit of extra data. For example, in vitro and in vivo, do you italicize that or not? And it really depends on the journal. I was surprised to see that the Journal of General Virology, Nature, Journal of Biochemistry, and the Journal of Virology use italics, whereas Cell Science, Journal of Experimental Medicine, PNAS, do not use italics. And then I found some other journals that are mixed. Some authors italicizes it, and some of them don't. I think that might be something that you're familiar with, and if you're not yet, you will become familiar with the idea that every journal has a different standard. Okay, let's get on to what matters to us as speakers of formal language. There's almost always a casual substitution for formal words, and in this case, in addition to just means plus or and. Generally, when you're speaking, you don't need to worry about this so much, and in fact, it does sound strange if you are always saying in addition to this, in addition to that. It's too much, but these are phrases that you should have in your tool belt to pull out at cool times to sound formal. So, if you wanted to give a long list and then want to add on to that list something else that's not short, in addition to is a really good piece of adhesive. But you would never say something like, "Excuse me, host mother, would you please pass the salt in addition to the pepper?" So obviously there's times to just say and. It's generally when you have A, which is big, and B, which is big, and you want to connect them because they're logically on the same level with each other, use in addition to. So I am going to show you this kind of statistical data from journal articles in addition to more spoken data that's going to come in a future video. Has been shown or have been shown. This is part of a larger issue of using the present perfect. That's the name of this grammar. Instead of saying it was shown, say it has been shown. Well, besides that this is about time meaning if something has taken place repeatedly over the last few months or even the last few years, use the present perfect. Let's just read this sentence. Conversely, the multipotency of ASCs has been shown to be retained during long-term culture. And notice that they have multiple sources. That's because it's been shown by multiple authors. This isn't necessarily formal. However, showing that you have a good command of grammar also helps your formal language. Let me give you a more day-to-day example. Imagine it's about 12:45 or 1 o'clock in the afternoon. You bump into a colleague and you want to know if they are available for lunch because you were working a little bit late. Maybe they were too. If you said, "Oh, hey there, how are you doing? Did you have lunch yet?" That's fine. And in fact, in America, a lot of people do talk that way. In England and the UK, they're more likely to say, "Have you had lunch yet?" Which, if we are going to be strict about the rules of grammar, is more correct. I am not really that strict, but I'm just trying to say that if you have a good command of the difference between the present perfect and the simple past, this is an important part of showing good command of formal language. Last one I want to show you that are highly correlated to the introduction is this, the role of. I'm sure you've heard this phrase before, but I wanted to highlight these three because they all appear in more than a third of every introduction. So here, it's speaking of the role of small rodents in viral dissemination. Now, you could say casually that it's because of small rodents, or it's small rodents' fault that the virus spreads. Okay, that's okay, but on stage you probably want to sound a little more formal, and often that makes you sound neutral, which can be important for the way that you present yourself. So you'd want to say, in the role of spreading the virus, this must be considered, something along those lines. Okay, please do look through the list and get familiar with these. I didn't highlight this, but I actually did want to talk about "we found that" is another highly frequent phrase correlated to the discussion section and secondarily the results section. This is not necessarily formal, but I just highlight it to say using simple words is not necessarily bad. Okay, the words show, see, find, these are totally okay to use. In fact, if you try too hard to use a word like obtain or we elucidated that, if you use the word like elucidate incorrectly, it probably actually hurts the formal atmosphere. So I would say don't be too worried about using difficult words. That's not really what formal speaking is about. It's more about speaking clearly and carefully. Okay, so we found that is a totally fine phrase, even in formal language. Due to the, this is a nice one. I would say that instead of saying because of the, try to say due to the. It's silly, maybe, but somehow it seems more formal and respectful to say due to, even though it's exactly the same meaning as because of. On the other hand is a good phrase to be aware of. This second example is a nice case where you have, on the one hand, blah, blah, blah. On the other hand, blah, blah, blah. That's kind of cool. You can pull that out. It's a little bit like saying, but, although, or while, blah, 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 blah. Let me repeat. If you use the same phrase again and again, it doesn't sound good. That's kind of what's ironic about these is use it a couple times. Ooh, so formal and respectful. Use it 4 times. Oh, how disgusting. They are not sophisticated. I didn't say language was easy, and that's why we have class, right? Let's move on to the methods and results section. I just highlighted one from the methods, which is was used to. And that's probably for the same reason as we found that. It's really just fine to use a simple verb like use. Now, this is a case of passive grammar. It's called the passive voice versus the active voice. It's a grammatical structure where you shift the object and subject. So let me say an example here from the text. It says, the t-test was used to compare continuous variables between treatment groups. Okay? Now, you could switch that and just say, we used the t-test to compare continuous variables. That would be active. We used the t-test, active. The t-test was used to, that's passive. This is especially common in the methods section, and it seems like people think using the passive voice is more formal. I believe this is a debate. I don't think that there's any perfect answer on this one. Personally, I don't like to use the passive too much. I think that if you use the passive again and again, it almost sounds like you're trying too hard to be formal, and you're missing some subtle information which is included in the passive voice. So with writing, especially a journal article, especially the methods section, you need the passive voice a lot. With speaking, even on the stage at a big conference, I would just encourage you to use the active voice as much as possible. It's easier for the audience. It makes you feel more connected to them and them to you. And it's not informal. I think certain other teachers might disagree with me about that, but there's a trend in modern speaking that says that passive really isn't needed that much. I just used the passive just now. It's okay to use it, but it's also okay to say, if you look at my slide, or we want to show you something, that's totally fine. Okay, let me show you this group of phrases which are correlated to the results section. I really like a few of these. Consistent with the. That is cool. I'm going to just read one of these. These results confirm earlier conclusions that IL-12 is not essential for T-cell expansion in vivo and are consistent with the notion that IL-12 directs signals to the downregulation of this expression of this gene. Consistent with the. That is just it's a cool phrase. I wrote here, it's to show how the present study's findings match with others. So you have some data that you think matches really nice with someone else's data. This is a phrase I would love you to pull out and say, consistent with the findings of previous researchers, we've discovered that. That's a phrase that you just have to kind of keep in your head. Consistent by itself doesn't do that. Now you could switch it and say, for example, our results are consistent. Well, you still have to say with. So just learning the word consistent isn't going to help you as much as learning the phrase consistent with the. I guess that's my main point. Let me skip these two just for now, and I want to go to in contrast to. So this is a nice counterpart to our earlier phrase in addition to. Go ahead and use both of those back to back. That's actually kind of cool. If you said, we discovered A. In addition to that, we discovered B. In contrast to previous results, we found this and that. However, all of this is consistent with the findings of blah, blah, blah. So mix and match these. Mix and match them and just try it out, especially in the English lesson. Try new words, just like you might try a new dance move or a new basketball move or whatever. When you are practicing, that's what English lessons are for. Make mistakes in the lesson, and I'll help correct you if they are wrong, and then you'll be more ready for your presentations. Final thing I want to say from this list is in the presence of and in the absence of, and I think I even have one that's got both. In the presence or absence of. I'm not sure you can use this in speaking so smoothly. I just kind of wanted to highlight it because both of these occur in 1/3 of all research results sections. And this is a case where this cluster is true whether it's the physical sciences or humanities or the social sciences. In the presence of this element, we found that. In the absence of more data, we must perform. They're kind of cool phrases that everybody in the audience can get on with. These are very useful phrases. I did actually have one more. This final section has no correlation to any section, but they are highly frequent. So as well as occurs in 2/3 of all journal articles. I thought, wow, well that's impressive. We should really try to use this phrase more and more. And perhaps you do. But I'm just trying to raise your awareness. So this is, again, another alternative to in addition to or and. It's a nice way to combine large A with small b, for example. So it's when you have two things that are logically connected, but the rhythm doesn't sound good to use and. Let's use as well as. Finally, I'm repeating myself, but don't use it again and again and again. That only harms the formal atmosphere.